You didn't love her. You loved your idea of her. And the grief you feel now isn't for the person you lost, but for the beautiful lie you can no longer tell yourself. You didn't love her. You loved your idea of her. The silence she left behind is a confession. Not about her feelings for you, but about your need to invent them in the first place. The ache that settles in your bones is a particular kind of emptiness. It's the phantom limb of a connection you swore was real. You sought belonging, a quiet harbor where you could finally lay down the weight of pretending. But the structure you built, the one you called love, was designed to keep the most essential person out. You, the real you, the belonging you craved was never with her, the actual imperfect person who stood before you. It was with an idea, a flawless, predictable, and ultimately safe ideal you created. True belonging is a terrifying landscape. It demands a vulnerability that feels like standing unclothed in a field, exposed under a vast and indifferent sky. It requires being truly seen, not just looked at, by someone who is actually there with all their own chaotic weather. What you constructed was an insurance policy against that storm. You engineered a connection without the risk. A fantasy cannot find your flaws repulsive. An ideal cannot wake up one morning and decide to leave. You weren't seeking the unpredictable tide of a shared life. You were seeking the certainty of a painted ocean, a beautiful, static image of love. In your attempt to achieve a connection that could not hurt you, you guaranteed the only pain that truly matters. The profound, echoing loneliness of realizing you were always standing in that harbor alone. You were trying to touch something divine, something transcendent, but you refused to take the risk of leaving the shore. And now the tide has gone out, revealing the barren, cracked earth you were standing on the entire time. This carefully built architecture was not just a shield, it was a strategy. The idea of her was never just about companionship. It was a solution to a much older, much deeper problem. The quiet, gnawing suspicion that you are not enough. She was never a person to be discovered, explored, and understood in her own right. She was a prize to be won. A final trophy for the empty cabinet of your self-worth. If you could just secure her, this perfect, imagined being you curated in the private gallery of your mind, it would serve as the world's final, irrefutable proof. The evidence that you were, at last, worthy of love. Every gesture you made, every sacrifice, every quiet moment you spent thinking of her, was not a pure offering. It was a payment, an installment on a debt you believe you owe for your own existence. It was a covert contract, written in invisible ink. I will give you this perfect, unwavering adoration, your soul whispered into the void. And in return, you will give me a reason to finally stop hating myself. You turned a human being into a benchmark for your own validation. You weren't building a home with her. You were trying to pass a brutal, exhausting test that you, and you alone, had set for yourself. And the silence she left behind is your final grade. The grief that greets you in the quiet moments is not a sharp, piercing pain. It is a vast, hollow ache. It has weight but no form. It feels as if a great and sacred space within you has been desecrated, emptied of its light. You walk through the rooms of your own mind and feel the cavernous silence she left behind. But the truth you have not yet allowed yourself to touch is that the cathedral was always empty. The soaring, holy feeling that you mistook for her presence, the divine atmosphere that seemed to sanctify your life, was never coming from her. It was the echo of your own desperate prayers for connection, your own whispered hopes for a final salvation, bouncing off the cold, stone walls of your own longing. You built a magnificent monument to her, and you were its only worshiper. You remember standing in that sacred space, awestruck by what you believed to be its divine presence. You would whisper her name, a reverent prayer into the stillness, and a sound would return to you, soaring, resonant, and beautiful. It felt like a response from the heavens, a confirmation that your faith was seen, that your love was returned. But it was only your own voice, amplified by the vast emptiness you had furnished for her, returning to you from the void. You mistook the sound of your own longing for the sound of her love. You heard a symphony in her silence because you were the one providing the music. You saw profound meaning in her most casual glance because you had already decided she was a deity. The tragedy is not that the cathedral is empty now. It is that you have only just noticed. The pain is not in her leaving, but in the slow, horrifying realization that you were always standing in that space alone. The echoes are fading now, and for the first time, you are hearing the silence for what it is. Not a holy quiet, but a simple absence. The ground you thought was consecrated feels like common earth beneath your feet. The stained glass windows you admired, which you thought were illuminated by her soul, were only catching the light of your own sun. You are not mourning the loss of a goddess from the altar. You are mourning the discovery that there was never a goddess at all, only a pedestal you built, waiting for someone to fill it. Look back now, not at the feelings, but at the sheer effort. The hours you spent planning, the relentless attention to the smallest details, the futures you mapped out in your mind with architectural precision. You believed you were building a home, laying down a foundation brick by brick for a shared life. But building a home is a messy, collaborative work. It requires two sets of hands, two sets of plans, two people willing to get their hands dirty with the concrete and the wood. It requires arguments over the color of a wall and compromises on where to place the furniture. What you were doing was something else entirely. You were decorating a stage alone. You were the solitary artist, the master set designer, curating the perfect aesthetic for a beautiful life that had not yet begun. Every gift was a prop. Every planned date was a scene. Every imagined conversation was you, writing her script for her. You spent your time arranging the furniture for a future you assumed was shared. You chose the lighting for moments that would never happen. You set the scene, day after day, for a beautiful play, but you never stopped to check if your co-star had even read the script, let alone if she wanted to be in the production. The work you did was not foundational. It was cosmetic. It was easier to hang a beautiful painting on a wall than to check if the wall itself was structurally sound. It was easier to dream of the life you would have in the house than to do the grueling work of digging the foundation with a partner. Because decorating can be done alone. All it requires is an idea, an image. Building requires another person, in all their unpredictable, inconvenient, and unidealized reality. And then the curtain rises. The moment you expected the performance to begin, the moment you thought the shared life would finally start, you found yourself standing alone. You were exposed by a single, harsh spotlight on a perfectly decorated, breathtakingly beautiful, and completely empty stage. Suddenly, all the carefully chosen furniture looks absurd. The curated props feel hollow and cheap. The sheer scale of the empty space around you is no longer full of potential, but is mocking you with its vacancy. The tragedy wasn't that she walked off stage. It's that she was never there to begin with. You have been rehearsing a two-person play by yourself, for an audience that never bought a ticket. The pain is not just the silence from the seats. It is the profound, quiet shame of realizing you have been acting your heart out to an empty house. You were not in a relationship with the person who sat across from you at dinner. You were in a relationship with her future self, a version of her that existed only in the architecture of your hope. This imagined person, the one she could become, was the most potent and soothing poison you ever administered to yourself. It was a drug that kept you hooked, a gentle venom that made the present moment tolerable. Every time the reality of her indifference or distance caused a flare-up of pain, you would reach for another dose of her potential. Someday she will see. Someday she will understand. Someday she will be the person I know she can be. This someday was your anesthetic, allowing you to endure the quiet surgery of your own self-abandonment without screaming. This addiction to her potential explains everything. It explains why you stayed when every sign told you to leave. It explains why you accepted crumbs of affection as if they were a feast. You weren't living in the relationship as it was. You were living in the future you were certain would arrive. This future was a drug that made the present blurry, taking the sharp edges off of every disappointment, every unanswered message, every moment you felt invisible in her presence. You became an expert alchemist, turning the lead of her neglect into the gold of a future promise. It was a constant, exhausting, and ultimately draining act of translation. It's like holding a lottery ticket. The small piece of paper in your hand is, in reality, almost worthless. But you don't value it for the paper it is. You value it for the millions it could be worth. You organize your life around this possibility. You dream of the house you will buy, the debts you will pay, the life you will lead. You have built an entire emotional life, a towering structure of hope, around a possibility, not a reality. Her potential was your lottery ticket. You invested everything you had into the chance of her, convinced of a jackpot that was never going to pay out. And now the drawing is over. The numbers have been called, and you are left standing there, holding a worthless piece of paper, realizing you have not just lost the prize. You have lost all the time and energy and hope you poured into the fantasy of winning. You are not just broke. You are bankrupt. The truth of the situation was never a secret kept from you. It was a language you refused to learn. It was written in plain sight, day after day, in 1,000 small, undeniable moments. The evidence that she was not the person you had cast in the movie of your mind was always there, clear and unavoidable, like footprints in freshly fallen snow. Every text that went unanswered for hours, every plan that was vaguely canceled at the last minute, every time you reached for her emotionally and met a cold, smooth wall. These were the tracks. They were clear signs, pointing in the opposite direction of the path you were on. But you made a choice. You chose actively to be blind. In a quiet, determined act of self-preservation, you lifted your gaze from the tracks at your feet and stared instead at the flawless, untouched snow of the horizon, the pure, white canvas of your immaculate fantasy. This blindness was not a passive state. It was an active discipline. It required constant vigilance. You saw the footprints. For a split second, your heart would register the cold truth of their direction. You would feel the flicker of panic, the lurch in your stomach that signals a departure. But then the training would kick in. You would avert your eyes. You would quickly cover the tracks with a fresh layer of rationalization. She's just busy. That's just how she is. She doesn't mean it that way. You became an expert at looking at the evidence of her absence and calling it a testament to your own patience. You told yourself you were strong for waiting, when in reality you were simply refusing to read the goodbye note that was being written in the snow one step at a time. To acknowledge the footprints would have meant acknowledging that the story you were telling yourself was a lie. It would have meant admitting that you were walking alone, following a trail that was getting colder with every step. And that truth was more terrifying than the fiction you were living. The fiction, however painful, still held the promise of her potential, the warmth of the someday you were addicted to. The truth offered only the cold, empty wilderness of abandonment. So you kept your eyes on the horizon. The ending feels so sudden to you now only because you refused to watch the slow, methodical process of her walking away. You are not shocked because she left. You are shocked because you finally ran out of horizon to look at, and you were forced, at last, to look down at your feet and see that you are surrounded by nothing but the clear, undeniable, and long cold tracks of someone who has been gone for a very, very long time. Then comes the moment of impact. After all the decorating, the hoping, the willful blindness, there eventually comes a moment when the illusion can no longer sustain its own weight. It might be a single, careless word that cuts through the noise of your own justifications. It could be an act of profound indifference that no amount of rationalization can soften. Or perhaps it is just a final, deafening silence. An absence so complete that it becomes a presence in itself, a vacuum that pulls all your fantasies into it. Whatever the catalyst, it acts as a catastrophic system failure. It is the moment the machine you've been running for so long, the one generating this perfect reality, finally sputters, whirs, and grinds to a halt. It is the collapse of the projection screen. Imagine yourself sitting in a dark movie theater, completely absorbed. You are lost in the most beautiful film you have ever seen. The story is perfect, the colors are rich, the love is transcendent. It is your life as you believe it to be. You are so lost in the narrative that you have forgotten you are in a theater, forgotten the world outside, forgotten even your own body in the seat. Suddenly, with a sickening shudder, the projector dies. The image flickers, distorts into a meaningless pattern of light, and then vanishes. The sound cuts out, replaced by a jarring silence. The emergency lights flicker on, casting a cold, institutional glow over everything. And for the first time, you are forced to see the screen itself. A blank, stained, and unremarkable wall. The shock is not just that the movie is over. It is the violent, nauseating whiplash of being ripped from one reality and thrown into another. The horror is in the revelation that the magic you believed was inherent to the story was nothing more than a trick of light and shadow. The beautiful world you inhabited seconds ago did not fade away. It was proven to have never existed at all. This is the moment you are living in now. You are sitting in the dark, the smell of burnt-out hope in the air, staring at the blankness of what is, not the beauty of what you imagined. The silence is no longer a canvas for your dreams. It is an accusation, and the pain that floods you is not simple grief. It is the profound disorientation and shame of a person who has just discovered that the great love of their life was a film they were watching all by themselves. Now, in the quiet darkness of the empty theater, we arrive at the central psychological truth. Her role in your life was never truly to love you. It was to reflect your own unmet needs back at you in a form you could finally admire. You were starving, and you mistook a mirror for a feast. Every quality you worshipped in her was a direct reflection of a deficiency you felt in yourself. Her perceived perfection was a shimmering echo of your own deep-seated feeling of imperfection. Her imagined strength was a mirror for your own perceived weakness. The profound peace you believed she possessed was just a reflection of your own inner chaos. You didn't fall in love with her. You fell in love with the reflection of your own salvation. This hunger is an old hunger. It did not begin with her. It is a deep foundational emptiness, a need for worth, for validation, for a feeling of wholeness that you have carried for a very long time. You projected this vast need onto her, and she became the screen for it. Her presence in your life became the answer to a question you were too afraid to ask yourself: am I worthy? As long as the projection held, as long as you could believe in her perfection, the answer felt like yes. She was not a person. She was a function. She was the mirror you held up to convince yourself that you were not starving, because you could see the image of a feast in it. Think of it this way. You believed you had discovered a rare, impossibly bright star in the night sky. A singular point of light that burned with a unique fire, one that seemed to shine just for you. You navigated by it, you prayed to it, you organized your entire universe around its magnificent glow. But you were not looking at the heavens. You were looking at a dark windowpane on a moonless night. And the brilliant star you were so captivated by was only the faint, flickering reflection of your own tiny candle, held in your own trembling hand. All of that light, all of that perceived warmth and guidance was coming from you. The tragedy is that you could only see its value when you believed it belonged to someone else. And the devastation now is in realizing you've been worshiping your own reflection in the dark. This brings us to an even more difficult truth. You were not a passive observer in this dynamic, simply admiring a reflection in a mirror. You were an active creator. You were not her partner. You were her ghostwriter. This reframes the entire experience from something that happened to you into something you meticulously, if unconsciously, constructed. You didn't just guess her feelings. You wrote them for her. You didn't just wonder about her motivations. You scripted them, giving her a depth and a noble complexity that was, in truth, your own. You were the author of the character you fell in love with, and you worked tirelessly to make her real. When she was silent, you wrote entire monologues for her in your mind. filling the emptiness with a rich inner world of profound thoughts and unspoken affections that you needed her to have. When she was distant or inconsistent, you authored a tragic backstory for her, creating a narrative where her unavailability wasn't a sign of indifference towards you, but a symptom of a deep wound that only your love could heal. You were not just an observer, you were the director, the screenwriter, and the casting agent in a production of one. You wrote her lines, you coached her performance from the private theater of your own mind, and you fell desperately in love with the protagonist of a story you penned yourself. The grief you feel now is the strange, specific, and isolating grief of a writer whose most beloved character has suddenly been written out of the story against their will. You feel abandoned by her. But how can you explain to anyone that you feel abandoned by a person who only ever truly existed on the pages of your own heart? You cannot share your mourning because no one else ever met the person you knew. They only met the real person, the one who lived outside your narrative. The sense of loss is so profound because you were the one holding the pen. And the most painful paradox of all is the feeling of being left, even when you were the one writing her every move. The story has ended not because she reached her final chapter, but because the real person simply closed the book, walked off the page, and left you alone in a room full of your own beautiful, heartbreaking, and unpublished words. This pattern of creating, of writing, of projecting a perfect love onto an imperfect canvas, it did not begin with her. This is a much older story. To understand the intensity of your creation, you must understand the depth of your earliest thirst. For those who grow up in an emotional desert, where love and affection are scarce, conditional, or simply absent, the need for connection is not a preference. It becomes a matter of survival. The intensity of your idealization, the sheer power of the fantasy you built, is directly proportional to the depth of that original drought. She was never just a person to you. She was the idea of water to a man dying of thirst. And when you are dying, you do not question the oasis. You simply crawl towards it with whatever strength you have left. This is the oldest thirst. It is the foundational wound from a time when your emotional needs were not met, leaving you with a profound, aching void. You learned early on that to receive any warmth at all, you had to perform, to imagine, to create the love you were not being given. You became skilled at surviving on minimal resources, at finding nourishment in a glance, a rare word of praise, or in the simple hope that tomorrow might be different. This skill, born of necessity, became a blueprint for your adult relationships. You don't know how to simply receive love. You only know how to work for it, to earn it, to build a case for it. You project a perfect savior onto people because you are still that child, alone in the desert, scanning the horizon for any sign of rescue. This is why you were so susceptible to the mirage. A traveler who is dying of thirst in the desert sees a shimmering oasis on the horizon. It is lush, it is vibrant. It promises shade and life and an end to the agonizing heat. He does not stop to question its reality. He crawls towards it, pouring his last ounce of strength into reaching it, believing it to be his salvation. But a mirage is not water. It is a cruel and beautiful trick of light, atmosphere, and desperation. It is an illusion born of heat and emptiness. The closer the traveler gets, the more it seems to recede, until it disappears entirely, leaving him more depleted, more hopeless, and more alone in the vast, unforgiving expanse than he was before. Your relationship was this mirage, and the agonizing exhaustion you feel now is not just from this recent journey. It is the accumulated exhaustion of a lifetime spent crawling toward illusions. This brings us to the final stage of this particular kind of grief. If you can find the courage to be truly honest with yourself, you will see that you are not mourning the loss of the person she was. You are mourning the loss of the cure you thought you had found. Her presence in your life was a powerful medicine you prescribed for yourself. It was the antidote you believed would finally neutralize the poison of your own loneliness, the balm you thought would soothe the ache of your own perceived worthlessness. Her love was not her love. It was your hope for a permanent remedy. The grief that now occupies your every waking thought is not for her. but for the collapse of the belief that another person could be the key to your healing. This is a difficult and confusing grief to hold. It feels like finally accepting that the bottle of rare, expensive pills you were taking to cure a fatal disease was, in fact, filled with nothing but sugar. For a long time, the belief in the cure was enough. The placebo effect was powerful. Just knowing the bottle was on your nightstand brought you immense comfort. It allowed you to live with the illness, to function, to feel a sense of hope. You organized your days around taking this medicine, you cherished it, you protected it. You believed it was keeping you alive. But the illness never went away. It was simply masked by the power of your faith in a false remedy. And now the bottle is empty, or worse, you have discovered the truth of its contents. The fear that follows this discovery is immense and absolute. You are now face to face with the original illness, but without the comfort of your illusory cure. This is the terror you are feeling. It is the raw, unmedicated reality of your own inner state. Yet, this is also the first moment of true possibility. The act of finally throwing away the bottle of placebo pills is terrifying, but it is the necessary first step towards seeking real treatment. You are no longer wasting your life waiting for a sugar pill to perform a miracle. You are finally free to turn and face the actual wound. You are mourning the cure that never was, and in doing so, you are for the first time creating the space to find a cure that can be. The end of the fantasy is not the end of your story. It feels like a death, and in many ways it is. But it is also the beginning of the possibility of a real and true belonging. The healing path forward is not the search for a better, more worthy screen onto which you can project the next film. It is not about finding a person who can better play the role you have written. The true path is about finding the raw, terrifying courage to let the projector burn out for good, to let the theater stay dark, and to simply sit in the uncomfortable silence of reality. It is the courage to arrive, finally, in your own life, to show up for yourself with all your flaws, your needs, and your hunger, and eventually to show up for another real person who is also showing up for you, imperfect, inconsistent, and gloriously, disappointingly real. That is the only connection that will ever hold. What you projected onto her was never random. It was the most sacred part of you. Psychologically, some would say that this idea of her was a projection of your own soul image, the unlived potential within you. You outsourced your own light, your capacity for depth, your hunger for beauty, your belief in magic, your need for wholeness, onto her because it felt too heavy or too dangerous to carry yourself. Your shadow, that desperate and needy child in the desert, was what fueled the projection. But the light itself, the divine spark you saw that so captivated you, was always your own. The work now is not to forget her. The work is to begin the slow, painful, and holy process of reclaiming that projection. It is to realize that every quality you worshipped in her is a quality that lies dormant within you, waiting to be cultivated. The depth you saw in her is your own depth, waiting to be explored. The magic you felt from her was your own magic, waiting to be used. Reclaiming it is the ultimate homecoming. It is the work of a lifetime, and it begins now, in this quiet, broken, and finally honest place. We have written a short guide about this specific wound, the difference between loving a person and loving a projection. It's a map to help you name the ghost you've been chasing. It's free, and it's as honest as this conversation has been. The link is in the description. If you recognize the architecture of this prison, it's because you helped build it. The blueprint is inside you. This channel is for diagnosis, but the work of demolition, that happens elsewhere. The conversation continues for those ready to pick up a hammer.